Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here with James and Henri. Maybe I can start just to get a sense of who's in the audience. How many of you are customers of Free Now and or Dott, or at least are familiar with these brands? Quite a few of you, but not everybody. So maybe we can start just by getting a quick overview of your two companies. Henri, can you tell us a little bit about Dott?
Sure. So Dott, we are a mobility operator focused on e-bikes and scooters. We operate in 40 cities in Europe, 10 countries, in most of the capital cities like Paris, Rome, London, Milan, Warsaw. And we are known for having pioneered the full stack model where we do 100% of our operations in-house. It's quite difficult to build, but it's much more efficient, much better for the end user when it works.
And Free Now?
So at Free Now, we really see ourselves as a European super app for mobility. So we originally started actually as a ride-hailing company. So we started with licensed taxi services, and then we moved into PHV as well. We actually operate those in over 150 cities across Europe. But now in 30 cities, we actually have a full multi-modality offering. So we've partnered with 6 partners, 6 of the top partners when it comes to e-mopeds, when it comes to e-scooters, car sharing, e-bikes. So in those 30 cities, customers also have access to over 130,000 choices when it comes to how they can move around cities.
And you are owned by a couple of companies who people definitely know.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're partnered currently with, on the car sharing side, Miles and Share Now. We're partnered with Voi. We're partnered with Emmy. And we're also very happy actually to today announce that we're also partnering now with Dott. So we've just signed a contract with Dott to partner with them and obviously integrate their e-scooters into the platform and hopefully soon the e-bikes as well.
And so people within your app will have access to Dott's scooters and e-bikes?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it obviously depends on the city that you're located in, particularly in places like Germany and in Paris and in London. If you open the app on Free Now, you get access to the ride-hailing, to the licensed taxis, but also to the car-sharing options, to the e-scooters from actually the top 3 European providers, and also the e-bikes and also the e-mopeds if they're available.
Let's talk a little bit about the highest level missions of your companies beyond just helping somebody get access to a ride or a scooter. Henri, I know you're very passionate about what you're trying to do here, and it's really ambitious. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a young engineer, it was impossible for me to get a taxi. I lived in the suburbs. I mean, there were just no taxi, and the closest metro station was 10 minutes away. So transportation for me was a nightmare. I've been on this crusade for almost 15 years now to change the way cities behave, free our cities from congestion, pollution, try to do it better. And that's why we're so happy to partner with Free Now. We're all on this mission to make mobility inside cities much better. We're all against trying to convince people to ditch their personal car. When you think about why they have their personal car, it's because they want the freedom of the personal vehicle. At the same time, they like the availability, the reliability, the affordability, the fact it's environmentally friendly to use public transit. But public transit doesn't give you the freedom. In my neighborhood, in my suburbs, I couldn't get public transit. And so we're trying now to build these shared services together, multi-modes, so you can have this type of shared infrastructure, the freedom of your personal vehicle with the availability, the reliability, and the affordability of public transit.
And it's about having access to different options depending on whether you're going a mile or two or you're taking the whole family on a trip.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we wanted to partner with Free Now, because we believe that the way to convince people to ditch their personal cars is to offer them as many options as possible. From when you have the luggage and the kids to when you just want to flow through traffic on a scooter or an e-bike.
Free Now is a partnership between Daimler and Benz, so you have a kind of car-centric background, but what are the goals of your company?
Actually very similar to Henri, and I think that's why we're obviously so happy with the partnership, because we have a very similar mission, right? We really want to see a reduction in private car ownership. I think in the last 5 or so years, the way that people move around cities and the choices that they have really exploded, right? So I think probably 5 or plus years ago, you're looking at maybe taking a licensed taxi, maybe public transport, maybe a private hire vehicle if it's available. But now I don't know what it's like for the people in the audience, but when I leave my house, I live in Berlin, I have so many different choices that I can make for how I want to get from A to B or A to B to C. So, I mean, obviously it depends on, it might be that I want to go to the office, which for me is a few kilometers, not too far away in the center of Berlin. If the weather's nice, maybe I want to take an e-scooter. But obviously if it's raining, then I'm going to make a different choice. Maybe then I take a car-sharing car. Maybe I want to take a smart car because it's much smaller, so it's easier to park. Or it could be that I'm going to go for dinner on the other side of town, so maybe I actually want to take a taxi. So you have so many different options now, and I think that's what we're really driven towards at Free Now, is making sure that people have the option to make those choices in a very seamless and friction-free way.
And to do that is extremely complex. When you think of a personal car, you have your keys in a pocket, you walk to it, you sit in it, you start it, and it goes. We want to offer the same experience in Free Now on Dott. So you walk to a scooter, you walk to an e-bike, it just works.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to ask about that because there are an awful lot of moving parts to both of your companies, and if you are, Dott, I know, is particularly you take on more of the responsibility for these scooters and e-bikes than some other companies who are doing what you do. Can you talk a little bit about how you get to an experience for both cars and other types of vehicles that is so seamless that it looks like a better option to people than owning their own vehicles?
Fundamentally, it's about making sure it's safe, it's environmentally friendly because the new generation wants change in the cities, and it has to be as easy as using your personal car. The key experience I just described. You walk to it, it just works. You press a button to call a car, it just works. That's what people want. But behind the scene, to do that is extremely complex. The level of quality control, manufacturing, operations, we check our e-bikes every 10 trips. We have all types of sensors to tell us whether the thing is healthy or not. We have people patrolling the streets 24/7. There's enormous amount of technology in order to properly park the bikes and the scooters 97% of the time. But the user doesn't see anything. It just works.
Free Now, I know, is in some cases, you're doing something similar to an Uber or Lyft. You're also working with more traditional taxi companies. What do you do to sort of bundle those up into an experience that's simple for the customer?
I think, obviously, like Henri described on his side, there's obviously a lot of technical complexity that goes into how to operate and manage a fleet of e-scooters in a city. I think luckily for us, it's a little bit more simplistic, so we have to worry obviously about the integrations into our platform. We obviously need to make sure that the availability is correct on the platform when customers actually open Free Now and want to book one of the scooters. I think on the other side, when it comes to licensed taxi and when it comes to PHV, obviously we have to spend a lot of time working with local authorities and local governments, making sure that all the documentation is in place for the drivers. Like Henri mentioned, safety is very, very important for us. So I think on one side we're kind of lucky that we can obviously integrate and take advantage of the great technologies that are being built, but at the same time need to spend a lot of focus on the security and safety when it comes to the ride-hailing and licensed taxis.
Sorry, go ahead, Henri.
Yeah, I just want to, we also need to empower the teams inside the cities that are on this mission. It is, when you spend time with them, it's so hard to convince all the stakeholders to build a bike lane, to change a parking spot for a car for shared vehicles, whether it's cars, taxis, or bikes. There's this little crew in these huge cities that are fighting for change in mobility, and we need to empower them. So one of the things we do, we provide all our data, we are super transparent, we give them all the ammunition they need to convince people to change. And behind the scene, that's quite a crusade for them.
I live in San Francisco, and a few years ago when scooters came to San Francisco, the scooter companies did not work with the cities. In fact, I'm not sure if they even told San Francisco they were bringing all these scooters, and it did not work out very well. So I wanted to ask you about how Dott and Free Now work with cities in a little bit more detail. And are cities supportive of your vision?
Yeah, we're quite similar to Free Now. All these things you heard, we do none of that. We think it's just terrible, it was the wrong way. We're trying to do mobility the right way. And it was so short-sighted, pure greed. We are so much against that. It's about safety for the user, convenience, the car experience I described, the key experience I described, and the accountability and the transparency for the city. So everything you heard, we do the opposite. And now it's working well. The cities are super happy. If you go visit any of the cities, most of the time Dott is the preferred choice for the riders because we have such a superior experience compared to our competitors. But also the cities, they see us as the most trusted partner. Any city can walk 24/7 in one of our warehouses. They can talk to all our employees, all the people on the streets. We are so transparent.
It's very, very similar, right? Very similar. And I think, the trust part is really key. Obviously, trust towards customers and customers being trusting of the platform. But also when it comes to the local cities, I think we have a very ambitious mission when it comes to changing how people are moving around cities, but also how cities are designed, right? I think fundamentally cities are built for cars and for private car ownership. And I think obviously if we want to help the cities to actually think about how to build the smart cities in the future, if we want to talk about data and educate them in terms of how people are moving around, at what types of day, what mobility choices they're making, the trust has to be there. So we work very, very closely to make sure that it's there and we can actually be part of building that future for urban mobility.
Is this long-term, is this still an urban vision? Cities have the most problems with cars messing things up, but do you see some of this also coming to more suburban areas over time as well?
I think the suburban areas are the most interesting place to do it because this is where typically public transit density starts to break. In the place I lived in Paris for a long time, you had to take a bus in order to get to the metro station. Just that. So the consequence when I go back there, everybody's using their private cars. They're still using quite a lot of their private cars, sometimes taxi, sometimes services like Free Now. And we have to change that because these are the people creating a lot of the pollution, a lot of the congestion. It's so easy when you live downtown. You have a metro station every block. But when you live in the suburbs, so the real battle is in the suburbs.
Is that also true for Free Now?
Yeah, and I think we also saw that especially, there was this shift obviously before and after the pandemic. So I think before the pandemic, at least for Free Now on our platform, we obviously saw a lot of movement happening in the center of cities. And with the pandemic and then when lockdown started to ease, you actually could see, and we have some quite nice heat maps of how the movement actually really moved out to the suburbs. And I think now offices are starting to open up. It might start to shift and change. But there's definitely been a shift more towards the suburban mobility. And I think obviously Dott and e-scooters are great opportunities to be able to move around when you don't have that public transport network to support you.
We have our geofence for bikes and scooters is smaller than for cars at Free Now. The number one request we get at customer service is when are you expanding the geofence to the suburbs?
Cool. And are you, speaking of expansion, both of your companies are European-centric. Do you have any plans to broaden to other parts of the world?
Focus very much on Europe for us at the moment. So like I said at the beginning, we have the ride-hailing services in 150 cities, and in 30 of those we have the multimodality options. And I think the focus for us at the moment is to really expand that and obviously work with partners like Dott and work with new partners to be able to offer those vast selections of mobility options to more customers in more cities. So very much focus on Europe.
Yeah, we're very focused on Europe. We think the journey is maybe 0.5% complete. If you look at the ridership at commute time, 7 to 10 a.m. in the morning, at every red light, the number of private bikes, shared bikes, private scooters, shared scooters, you name it, it's still very, very tiny. But change is coming. Change is coming. Our company, for example, is based in Amsterdam. In the 70s, if you Google Amsterdam 1970s, it's full of cars. There's not a single bike. It's just cars everywhere. It only takes one generation of city administration, one generation of user, and one generation of entrepreneur, and you can change the city. And that's what we're going to do.
And now Amsterdam is the biggest biking city in the world.
I guess so.
You see that though, right? I mean, I've seen it as well. I actually grew up in London. I've been out of London for the last 10 years, but I think there's been a massive shift in, like 10 years ago, I would never have ridden a bike in London, right? It would have been a very frightening experience. But I think you start to see that there is this understanding from a city perspective to actually make sure that there is safe options for being able to move around, obviously for riding bikes and riding scooters. And I think that's something that we'll continue to see.
James, you mentioned the pandemic, and I wanted to ask about if there are other ways in which, as we come out of it, your businesses are a little bit different than they might have been, if for no other reason than a lot of fewer people are going into offices, at least right now and maybe indefinitely. For either of your companies, did you have to reassess what the world wanted from you? based on this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I mean, there's some kind of interesting things that you can observe, right? And I think, obviously, what we saw, I mean, during the pandemic, we pretty much went to zero, right? This was obviously a very tough period because people really weren't moving when the lockdowns were happening. But you can see that once the lockdowns start to ease, it starts to come back. And I think what's different is the choices that people are making about how they want to move around. So we could definitely see there was an apprehension, I would say, for people to actually go on public transport, which I think is very understandable. And I think obviously that's when we started to see a lot of pickup when it comes to e-scooters, e-bikes, car sharing especially really picked up as we came out of the lockdowns. And car sharing, I should clarify, is where basically there's cars on the street that you can rent for a minute or an hour or a couple of hours or a couple of days, and then drive those and park them anywhere you want in the city. So definitely I think there was like a conscious choice that happened to shift away from very, very busy forms of transportation. Obviously, also, I mean, some people might have recognized this if they come from places like Lisbon or Paris or London. I think when it comes to the PHV, so the ride hailing, I think it's taking a while for drivers to come back onto the platform, and I think that's causing supply pinches. So that means you might have to wait longer for a car, or maybe there's surge. But what we also notice in places like London, and what's good for us and good for the customer, is that we can actually offer the licensed taxi option, so the black cab option. And that is a very conscious switch that's happening at the moment, is customers are choosing to take, in London, black cabs. And I think it's for that supply issue reason, but also because I think it gives a better sense of security and safety, because you're enclosed, you're not in direct contact with the driver, and that's a very conscious decision that people are making.
Did the pandemic have a big effect on Dott?
Yeah, of course. I mean, all the traffic disappeared overnight. But what's interesting is post-pandemic, a lot of our users are actually commuters. They do multiple trips during the week, typically to the office, to a meeting, to see their friends at the restaurant. And they describe to us how their patterns have changed. So they may actually do less trips, but the appetite for freedom, the thing that was taken away from them for such a long time, is so much more intense. So they want to go to restaurants, they want to see people a lot more. But because their trips have reduced, it doesn't make any more sense to buy your own bike. If you're just going to go to the city downtown 3 days a week, why would you buy your own bike? And let it park in the streets for a couple of nights. So we see even more change to, I want more freedom, meaning I want more access to many options. And so I'm not going to limit myself to my own car, which is a pain for my wallet, or my own bike, because it maybe gets stolen. I'm going to move to shared services. So post-pandemic, we have a lot of tailwind.
Let's talk a little bit about the future. I assume that Free Now sees cars as continuing to be part of how we get around, but you have an ambitious plan to go zero emissions. Can you tell us a little bit about that, James?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually, in 2021, made the commitment that 50% of the trips that are done on the ride-hailing services will be done on electric vehicles by 2025. And then by 2030, we want to be completely net zero on emissions on the platform. And I think obviously that we sense that we have a very strong responsibility to do that and to really lead the way, right? And be very aggressive when it comes to the timelines that we actually want to hit those goals. And I think we also are in a very unique position where we can work with taxi owners, where we can work with company owners who run fleets of cars and help them to actually make that switch and actually help them to get good financing on EVs, on electric vehicles, and to really support that journey, as well as on the other side, obviously offering to customers who want to take the trips the option to book an electric car. And that's something we actually introduced relatively recently. You can really see a very strong appetite for customers to do that. Yeah.
What's kind of Dott's long-term vision in terms of, will you continue to be scooter and e-bike centric, or do you see other vehicles in your future?
Yes, I just want to come back to the point you raised. I think at some point, we are not far, maybe a couple of quarters or years away, a trip on a shared bike, a shared scooter, will have the same carbon footprint as a trip on a public bus. And we're not far. The bus doesn't emit a lot, but the carbon footprint of manufacturing is quite big. Scooters and bikes are a bit the opposite. So we're on our way there. I think, to answer your question, I think people want options. They want the freedom of choosing anything, anytime, everywhere, and right now. And it has to be down there. When you press a button on Share Now, the car is right there. When you want to go for a week, and you need a rental car, it needs to work right now. When you walk out of your office building, you're going to see your friends at the restaurant, the Dott bike or the Dott scooter needs to be less than 150 meters away. That's the way. And to achieve that is very, very difficult.
If we were to meet again, say in 5 years, will you have made enormous strides in your vision? You can kind of say mission accomplished, or is this such an ambitious thing you're doing that you have an infinite runway to make more and more progress over decades?
I still believe the journey is like 0.5% or 1% complete, but my favorite spot right now is to sit at a cafe and watch at the red light the traffic. And not just on Saturday and Sunday, but like commute times, 7 to 10 a.m. in Paris, 5 to 8 p.m. in London. Just watch and think what it was 10 years ago. It's insane. I mean, the traffic now of shared and private bikes and scooters is really, really big. It's coming. Change is coming.
I know that Paris has changed a lot for the better and become much more bike-friendly just recently.
But it's happening in all the other cities. Rome, Milan, Warsaw, Brussels, all these cities, they're changing. It's happening much faster than what people think. It's not as fast as pure digital services, but for sure the change is coming. It's just one generation of users.
James, at some point are we all going to be riding around in autonomous free now vehicles? Is that on your roadmap?
It will happen. It will happen. I'm not 100% sure on the timeline. I think we're probably talking more the kind of 5 to 10 year horizon. I think obviously there's really interesting stuff happening in terms of innovation when it comes to mobility. I don't think it's just about autonomous. I think there's interesting stuff happening when it comes to, and this might sound very crazy, but when it comes to flying taxis, for example, when it comes to drone taxis, really, really interesting stuff happening there. So I think obviously the focus is very much at the moment on the mobility options that we have available now, but that is on the horizon, and we're obviously having conversations with different companies testing and working on those, and we'll work with local authorities to see if that's something that we can actually put onto the platform and try.
Great. I wanted to thank both of you so much, and it should be fun to watch what happens over the next few years, and hopefully we will get the chance to talk more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.